Okay, welcome everyone. I am Melissa Stewart, Member Relations Specialist for HathiTrust, and myself and my colleagues are thrilled that you are all joining us today to talk about our resource sharing service that we have been working on for the last several months. Before I turn it over to my colleagues, I am going to do a little housekeeping. So we can go to the next slide. We'd like you to introduce yourselves to us today. If you could please put in the chat your name, your library, and a recent favorite title from your collection that you've come across in your work. We look forward to looking through those after today's session. So if you could do that, and then you all can see as we go. Next slide. So you should see that transcript, that closed captioning has been enabled. Also, we are recording today's session today and we'll be posting it to our YouTube channel and sharing the link with everyone, hopefully tomorrow. And we would like you to use chat for general discussion with each other. And please, if you have questions for us during the session, please use the Q&A feature. We will have several places during the session for Q&A. All right, next slide. Here is the plan for today. We're going to go over some context. That will be Jennifer Vinopal, and then Ange Zaitsev will talk about the resource sharing service, offer an opportunity to participate, and then talk a little bit about the service design approach and process for this work. And with that, I am now going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Thanks, Melissa. Hi, my name's Jennifer Vinopal. I am the Associate Director at HathiTrust. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about HathiTrust and give you a sense of the context for the rest of the presentation today. So HathiTrust was founded in 2008 as a not-for-profit collaborative of academic and research libraries. It grew out of the Google Book Scanning program. The original Google Book partner libraries wanted a place to put the digitized files of their books that Google had scanned. So they created a repository for preservation and access at the University of Michigan, and this became HathiTrust. We are a collaborative library hosted at the University of Michigan still, and sustained by our members who pay annual fees. We're governed by the member library deans and directors through our board of trustees and through member voting. On the right side of this screen, I've listed some things that are key HathiTrust differentiators for libraries. Our members co-invest in a collaborative approach to digitization and stewardship. For us, preservation and access are tightly linked. We believe that you can't have one without the other. The size and the scope of our collection are a core asset. The collection includes thousands of years of human knowledge from around the world in over 400 languages. And we do this, all of this, for our members' common benefit and for the public good. Next slide, please. Just a little bit more information about the collection. So we preserve and provide access to nearly 19 million digitized items to the fullest extent allowable by US and international copyright laws. It is a digital-only collection of books and serials. However, we have a shared print program to which member institutions make commitments. Our goal is to identify a shared print commitment through our own or other shared print programs for every item in the HathiTrust collection. So what is in the collection? We ingest digitized materials from 3 sources: the Google Book Scanning program, the Internet Archive, and also from member library digitization programs. 95% of the collection has been digitized by Google. These materials are subject to contracts that the library partners have signed with Google and to which we must conform. As well, approximately 60% of the collection is in copyright and 40% of the collection is out of copyright or public domain. Next slide, please. Why are we building this service now? So we asked our members during our strategic visioning process a year and a half ago, We asked them a couple questions that led to the creation of this service. We asked, how would you most like to see HathiTrust make an impact on libraries and the world in the future? And we heard many variations on the theme of providing more access to more materials, and in particular of leveraging the copyrighted content as the law allows. And you can see some of the quotes here, and I've highlighted some aspects that are pointing us toward greater leveraging our copyrighted content. Next slide, please. In our strategic vision that came out of that conversation and many other conversations about our direction, you can see that we state in our strategic direction that we will expand access to and increase use of copyrighted, open, and public domain works in the HathiTrust collection. Regarding the copyrighted content, the copyrighted part of the collection and the services that leverage this content, we rely, as I mentioned before, on the US Copyright Code to support our work. And this includes fair use, or Section 107, which undergirds our emergency temporary access service. Section 121 regarding reading disabilities, which allows for our accessible text request service. And now for this resource sharing service, we're going to be relying on Section 108, Parts D and G regarding library lending. So Ange is going to explain more about that, and I will hand this over to Ange right now.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello all, I'm Ange Zaitsev. I am the User Research and Digital Services Librarian at HathiTrust, and I have been the project manager for this project for, depending on how you look at it, the last few months or the last couple of years. So I'll provide a little more context there. So in this section, I'm going to actually talk about what is this service that we are building and how will you be able to take advantage of it, and then also provide you with the timeline for the service development. So, sorry, here we go. Okay. So as Jennifer mentioned, it's important to understand the underlying basis for this service. This is based specifically on US copyright law section 108 D, G, and I. And if you haven't been staring at the copyright code as much as I have recently, let me just explain these subsections quickly to you. So subsection D provides the legal basis for interlibrary loan in the United States, and it specifically permits distribution of an article or a small part of a text. Subsection G warns against systematic reproduction and against using interlibrary loan as a substitution for purchasing books. And then subsection I provides exceptions for rights of reproduction for specific formats. So it forbids the use of distribution of music, pictorial works, or other formats through interlibrary loan. I want to point out here, we are not relying on section 107 for this service, which is the fair use components. And also this service is built on the premise that access to digital text is connected to what you hold in your print collection. So we know that based on the print holdings data that your library submits to HathiTrust, either at the time of joining, or you may have updated your print holdings recently or in the past. So this is similar in a way to the emergency temporary access service. If your library might have taken advantage of that service back in the particularly dark days of COVID, particularly serious days of COVID. And then another core principle that has shaped both the policy and the tech development work is that we rely as much as possible on the ILL experts in your libraries to determine appropriate usage of the service. I'm going to keep saying this again and again, but we are not ILL experts. What we are doing is just trying to facilitate and support your ILL services. Okay, so all that aside, what does this service look like? So HathiTrust Resource Sharing can be used in interlibrary loan or document delivery to fulfill the requests that can come in through those services at your institution. Only HathiTrust member libraries will be able to register to have access to this service. And in the first phase of rollout, this will only be libraries in the United States. I'll talk more about the broader timelines and when our non-US libraries will be able to take advantage of this service. So the service model for HathiTrust Resource Sharing is that your employees in ILL or document delivery units will register for access to copyrighted texts in HathiTrust. They will only be able to access copyrighted materials that are also held in print in your collection, as well as continuing to have uninterrupted access to the public domain materials. And the registered service providers are permitted to download chapters, articles, or excerpts. And then going on, registered service providers will be able to distribute HathiTrust texts to either their own patrons or to other libraries, as long as the patrons or libraries are located in the US. And again, this is for document delivery or ILL services. So one thing I do want to emphasize here too is that borrowing libraries do not have to be a HathiTrust member library. So in the previous slide, I had said that only HathiTrust members can register for this service, but when fulfilling ILL requests, recipients of the files do not have to be HathiTrust members. So you won't have to keep track of who is a HathiTrust member library and who is not. And then, so just to recap our service model, HathiTrust itself, we will not be receiving and fulfilling ILL requests. Instead, we'll be providing your ILL staff with access to eligible copyrighted materials, and your staff will be retrieving those texts to fulfill ILL. And also, something that I'm particularly excited about is that going forward, we are providing new guidance about the use of full view texts in ILL and document delivery. This is something that we've gotten questions about since I joined HathiTrust back in 2011. So it's really exciting that we're finally able to provide you with explicit guidance on this. And so going forward, and we'll talk a little bit more about timing there, but these full view texts, just to clarify, are items that are in the public domain, so the copyright has expired on them, and they are licensed with the CC license or a different open access license by the copyright holder. So you will now be able to also distribute these files through resource sharing services. So based on the service model that I described, the primary benefits of this service are that your staff will be able to free up more time to do more or other work. This will allow you to minimize the time that is spent retrieving physical text from the shelves, sometimes even retrieving text from off-campus shelving, and then minimizing the time to scan copies. And consequently, this will result in minimized delays in getting the text into the hands of your end users, of your patrons. This will hopefully also allow you to send more text to remote storage and free up those high demand campus spaces. And what's really exciting is that this could allow you to start sharing your non-circulating titles. So this could be the special collections materials or the rare books that you are trying to preserve for the long-term duration, or these could be texts that you have committed to retain in HathiTrust Shared Print program. So you'll be able to share the digital versions of these texts without having to worry about damaging your precious print copies. So here I want to talk a little bit about the timeline for this service. We have taken a very thoughtful and careful approach to the development of this service. beginning with our participation in Project Lend over the last couple of years. So Project Lend is a Mellon-funded project that was conducted by the University of California Libraries, and I see a bunch of our UC colleagues here. And this project looked into the usage of digital text by academic users and considered new or different ways forward for the use of these texts. The user research and the legal research in this project was particularly powerful and has informed our development of the resource sharing service. If you're interested in learning more about this project, the public documents were just published last month, and they can be accessed via the link in these slides. We also conducted a lot of research into the world of ILL just to understand this complex and special part of library world. Then going forward, our research more recently has been our previous research, where we did a bunch of learning and studying, basically answered a lot of questions about the basics, but then we had a lot of questions about what did the basics actually look like in reality. So we consulted with 14 of our libraries to answer those questions. So these were questions around local approaches to copyright, whether libraries follow Contu or not, or what are the different approaches they take there. Questions about vendor integrations or workflow implementations. And also in the beginning part of this year, we worked on developing our service policy so that as we go into the service development, we knew how to build out the service. So we are currently in this middle part of the timeline, which started about in March and will likely go through the end of the summer, where we are working on the service development. So this includes both the technology development, but there's also a lot around developing documentation, registration forms, modifying registration processes. And then once that process comes to a good place, we want to be able to pilot this service with 5 to 10 of our member libraries and get feedback on that service. So in the next section, I'll actually talk about what the pilot will look like and invite some of you all to consider participating in the pilot. But once, so this pilot phase will take 2 to 3 months, because in addition to working with some of our member libraries to test out the service, we also need to implement changes based on the feedback that we received. And then we are looking at rolling out this service to all of our US-based libraries starting at the end of this year. And this will be done in a phased way so that our small staff isn't overwhelmed by managing registrations for 300 campuses. So you'll be hearing more about that as we get closer to the end of the year. And just to give you a little taste of what's coming up in the future, this work that we're doing in this year is likely only the beginning of our foray into the world of resource sharing and interlibrary loan. In this first phase, we are focused on making it possible for our member libraries that are located in the United States to download articles and chapters. But next phases, starting in 2026, we will be expanding this resource sharing service to our non-US libraries. There's likely additional technology development that we'll do to make this service easier to use, for example, setting up open URL integrations. And much later, we might consider exploring lending of whole text. There's a whole lot of questions around this area of work and whether it would be possible in HathiTrust. So this is something we are considering for much later down the road. So I am going to take a pause here and ask Jessica if any questions have come into the Q&A that I can answer about what I just covered, or what Jennifer covered.
Indeed. Yeah, absolutely. So this is going back to the section we were talking about new guidance for full view
Yes.
texts. So first question, for the full view texts, is that permission to loan anywhere or just within the US?
So to keep it constrained in the immediate term, that guidance will be just within the US, so US to US. We are that later phase of expanding this service to non-US libraries will also include consideration of the full view files. We've got two batches, subsets of the collection that have are only accessible. Some materials are only accessible in the US and some materials are only accessible outside the US. So it just like results in some complexity around how to communicate about this content. Yes.
Right, here is another one. So just for clarity, in this phase, all US HathiTrust member libraries will be able to use this service, including those were excluded from ETAS.
Yes, and I know this question is coming from our New York Public Library colleagues. And yes, this would include non-academic institutions as well.
Okay, another question. Are you participating or following the project? I believe it's at NYPL to scan the Copyright Office's old records and determine whether works from that in-between period when copyrights had to be renewed are now in the public domain.
So we have our own copyright review projects that we've been working on, and I'm not the person who deals with those workflows, but we do have and have had active projects reviewing the copyright status of those materials and trying to open as much as we can where we've determined that the copyright has not been renewed. And Christina Hall, my colleague, who is the copyright program officer, I don't remember her title. I believe she has been collaborating with the NYPL and working with NYPL on that kind of work.
At one point, it was my understanding that I could report my damaged, weeded, withdrawn holdings to HathiTrust, and that would open up ETAS services for those titles. Does that apply here?
So great question. Because this service is based on the specific parts of D, G, and I of copyright code, withdrawn, brittle, lost, and missing titles would not become available through this service. That is I think it's subsection C is the specific section of 108 that permits usage of withdrawn or lost or missing. So in the immediate term, those would not become available through this service.
Okay, here's another one. For book chapter requests, do you append scans of the title and verso pages of the work?
Sorry, what was?
So book chapter requests, do you append scans of the title and verso pages of the work?
We include our own cover sheet for PDF downloads. You yourself would be able to select, go into the interface and select the pages for download. So you yourself could select the title page to be included with your download selections. And then we include automatically a HathiTrust cover sheet that includes the title, author, publisher, a link to the item in HathiTrust, and some other details to help clarify where the book came up from and the details of the book.
And do you want to keep answering questions? There are several more. Would you like to hold those for the next question period?
If it's easier, let's go on, because some of these are starting to get into some really nuanced, like really detailed things. And I'm seeing that we're going to need to provide like a guide of like, does this category of materials become available? Does this category? So I think we're looking at like additional documentation that will develop to answer these kinds of great questions. Okay, let's go on to talk about opportunities to participate. So we're about halfway through this session. And I do want to make sure that we're able to get through as many of your questions as possible as well. Okay, so in terms of what you can do now or in the near future to take advantage or participate in the service. So for all of you who are interested in thinking about how to take advantage of HathiTrust Resource Sharing, before the service rolls out, we will sometime soon publish the guidance around use of the public domain and CC licensed materials to fulfill ILL requests. So I don't exactly have a timeline for that yet, but it will come out sometime soon. And then as you plan and start to think about how to take advantage of HathiTrust Resource Sharing, we actually have two challenges for you. The first is that consider how to modify your workflows to include HathiTrust texts in the discovery part of it or in the fulfillment part of it. And then another thing that you may want to do in these coming months, especially after starting in August, is to update your print holdings with HathiTrust, especially if you haven't updated them in a couple of years. We want to make sure that we have a current picture of your print collection so that we can provide you with access to as many materials as possible. And then you can also sign up to receive updates for the service development, and we'll paste the link to a Google form in a few minutes when I cover a different slide. Okay. So I mentioned that we are interested in piloting this service with 5 to 10 of our member libraries. We want to have as diverse a group of libraries as possible for testing out the service so that we can make sure that we are accounting for a wide variety of circumstances. So we want to work with small liberal arts colleges. We want to work with big research institutions, public libraries, New York Public Library, if you're interested in participating, and also different scales of operation. So units that fulfill a couple thousand requests a year or units that fulfill over 60, 70,000 requests a year. And another important piece of this work is understanding the different ILL systems that you all use and making sure that we are accounting for those different systems and different workflows. The pilot participants will use an early version of the service, so not everything will be completely worked out in our interface. We're pushing out a minimum viable product for this service, and we'll continue to develop this service in our interfaces through the course of the pilot as we get feedback from pilot participants. And that feedback will include from the pilot participants will be on the interfaces, but also documentation and on system and workflow integration. To help your library decide whether you want to participate in the pilot, we've documented some expectations for those pilot libraries in the Google Doc that is linked here. I believe Jessica is dropping it into the chat. One important thing is to involve the appropriate employees at your library in the pilot. So we'll need the ILL supervisor and manager to sign up for the service and support their staff as they're using the service. And then of course the ILL staff themselves will be registered and using the service. But this might also involve us working with others outside of your ILL unit, particularly if you have a library systems team that manages your ILL systems. So that's something where we might need to talk to others. And of course, a key component of the pilot project is that your ILL staff that are registered would use the HathiTrust Resource Sharing service to fulfill ILL or document delivery requests. And we would ask you to engage with HathiTrust staff via scheduled meetings. For example, we'll probably have an onboarding call and a few check-in calls or office hours. and then also assess the service and provide feedback on the service through a variety of methods. So we'll have probably, we're still working out the details of what this will exactly look like, but likely to have some surveys and ask a few of the pilot participants to participate in usability studies. So yeah, check out those expectations. And then if you're interested in participating in this pilot and getting early access to this service, you can fill out the interest form that is linked here, and that will be dropped into the chat. We're also using this interest form to just get contact information. So feel free to enter your info into this interest form and indicate that you're interested in getting updates about the development of this service. And we also have a few questions about the scale of operations at your unit and how many staff, and a few questions that'll help us plan and understand the scope of things at our member libraries. And I think this is where I can pause for more questions about the pilot or anything else I've covered recently.
Ange, can I pop in with a couple of questions from the last round?
Sure.
Yeah. Are microfiche and microfilm holdings considered print holdings owned by the library for the purposes of ILL?
I cannot answer that question. I'll need to consult with my colleague, Natalie Fulkerson, on how those are handled in our print holdings. And a great question.
Right. Does the physical copy need to be sequestered for any period of time?
No, it does not. Because this is equivalent to your staff going to the shelf, grabbing the book, taking it down to your office, scanning the book, and then returning it to the shelf. That's not it. We're not requiring sequestering of texts.
Okay, so we can loan directly to a requesting external patron, not at a library, but we'd need to verify that the requester is in the US. It's not always obvious where someone sending an email or filling out a form is located.
So my assumption is that most of the requests that are coming into library loan units, into ILL units, are coming from a different library. And so if that library is based in the US, that should account for most of the circumstances.
What length of an excerpt is considered permissible? How is this calculated?
So this is one of those areas where we ourselves do not want to dictate it, a specific length or a specific excerpt, because this is something we learned from our conversations with member libraries, that there is a lot of variation in practice. Some libraries count, for some libraries, the length is one chapter. For others, it's like 50 pages. For other libraries, it's 10% of the full text. Because of that variation in practice, we are not implementing or managing that. We're trying to avoid conflicting with local practice there, so we're not dictating a specific length.
Right, and finally, for right now, what is the deadline for expressions of interest?
I would say over the next month or so, because we're still very much in the development part of this work, and we're not exactly sure when that work will wrap up. So if you are interested in participating, please do submit this form within the next month. So by mid-July. I see another question come in, but what if I continue going on, and as other questions come in, I can come back to them after these next few slides. Okay, so I want to finish this presentation by talking about our service design approach and the process that we are following to develop this service, because this is very much based in service design principles, if anyone has looked into that and is familiar with that concept. So because we want to make sure that we build a service that is responsive to the needs of our member libraries, we have been using service designs principles. So we've conducted a lot of research to date, and we plan to continue to do user research to inform our service development. Co-creation with our member libraries is another key part of this work, and we are doing this by undertaking the pilot project. So by working hand in hand with our member libraries through the pilot, we'll be shaping the service to meet their needs. Another important part of this work is taking an iterative approach, because this is such a big project. So we are breaking it down into smaller chunks and starting from what we know and then building out from there. So for example, we know US copyright law. We're most familiar with US copyright law because we're based in the US. So we're starting from US based libraries and building a service focused on US to US use, and then expanding out from there to other countries and considering cross-border and copyright-ish things. Then, so on this slide is a smattering of the things that we learned from our interviews with members. So as I mentioned, we learned about variances in how libraries interpret copyright law and interlibrary loan best practices. So we want to support what is being done at the local campus level and not impose our own rules as much as we can. So for example, we're not implementing we're not dictating a specific number of pages that are permitted to be downloaded through this service. We also learned from those conversations that libraries have different documentation practices around copyright decision-making. And where possible, where it matters for us, we need to use signals or add language to the interface to guide appropriate usage and access of this service, rather than relying on local documentation. And then because of variances in practice, it was also important to us to minimize technological restrictions such as DRM or digital rights management. In our early conversations, we heard that there was very little familiarity with DRM, and rather than impose this restriction that would make this service much harder to use, we are not implementing DRM for this service. One pain point that we heard about was file size limits in the systems that you use to distribute files to your patrons or other libraries. And this is one of those things where we heard about this and we're not exactly sure how much of an issue it is. So this is something that we would evaluate in our pilot project because one pain point that we hear about periodically is that our file sizes are too big. And then a huge area of learning for us is just figuring out how to modify local workflows and system integration to support discovery of HathiTrust materials. And at the end of our pilot, we hope to provide our members with basic guidance that we've developed in collaboration with our pilot participants. So in addition to the previous findings that were specific to ILL, we also heard and learned about some budget and purchasing trends that can have an impact on the availability of materials through HathiTrust Resource Sharing. So these are some bigger picture things that it's important to think about as at your library. We know that some of you are making very tough decisions about what to collect, about which services to support as the financial picture becomes much more austere in the coming years. So one thing that we heard is that many libraries are moving to digital first for acquisitions and are weeding print collections due to space restrictions And an important consequence of that is that this limits the availability of texts through HathiTrust services like resource sharing. And also that due to budget constraints, ILL units are being relied on more to fill gaps in acquisitions. So if there's a body of materials that gets very little use, rather than continuing to purchase those materials, ILL units are asking to fulfill those requests via ILL workflows. So this is also important to keep in mind, because if a library doesn't buy a print copy, they can't access the HathiTrust copy directly, but hopefully they will be able to request it from another HathiTrust library that does hold that copy. So I just wanted to share these last few thoughts as we, at that bigger picture level, and because there is this ecosystem of impacts and consequences in library collecting that I think are really interesting to think about. Okay, I'm gonna stop here and see what other questions we have.
We do have more. All right. Is it anticipated that there will be a local holdings flagging mechanism as a request comes into the system that would provide a link to the HathiTrust holding of the title, as opposed to ILL staff having to manually search?
Yes. And I can't address that directly because this is one of the things that we're trying to figure out through the pilot. I understand that Iliad allows you to load local holdings and like manage what materials are searchable through Iliad. And so we are going to explore that. We already have certain overlap holdings reports that we can make available. So it's just like figuring out what is the workflow, what is the integration, what is the data, metadata that we need to provide to make it possible to find HathiTrust materials as part of your regular workflows.
Okay, here's another question. So at this time, this will allow member libraries to fill requests from our in-copyrighted holdings in HathiTrust to our local patrons and use them to supply materials via ILL lending to other libraries. Can you explain if and how non-member libraries will be able to submit requests?
I would expect that you would receive those requests from non-member libraries as part of your standard ILL workflows, that you are receiving requests from public libraries, academic libraries, libraries all over the world, and are using your own local collections to fulfill those requests. I don't know if that makes sense. Heather does have her hand up, so maybe we can ask Heather to answer that question. So I'm not sure I quite understand it.
I don't think that we can have Heather speak. I guess I'm not seeing that. Heather is going to answer in the chat.
Right.
Okay. Just an observation here that we are unable to volunteer for the pilot. We use Iliad, and hopefully one of the pilot participants will also be an Iliad user.
Yes, agree.
Could you please reiterate when the pilot phase will end and when you expect this to open up full scale in the US?
Let me go back and show you the high scale timeline. So the pilot period itself would likely start in September. We're trying to avoid the busiest time of year, which for you all, which we hear is the beginning of the term. So probably start sometime in September, and the pilot period itself will run for about 2 to 3 months. And then the service will roll out to all HathiTrust members in a phased way, starting at the end of the year, 2025.
Here's another one. If my library owns a print book that is borrowed in print by one of our patrons, are we still allowed to use HathiTrust ILL to fill digital copy requests for this book from another library, another patron, while the print book is still out on loan to our patron?
Great question. So part of the service is about clarifying expectations and roles, and what you all need to do on your own campuses when receiving requests and evaluating requests. And the expectation is that you would do some work to confirm that the title is currently held on your shelves in your library. And sorry, I can't speak. We're still working on that documentation. So that is definitely something that we're keeping in mind. And hopefully we'll be able to have something to help you evaluate.
Right. There are a couple things coming in that I think are not quite questions, but there's some reference to an Iliad add-on. Maybe that someone could drop that in the chat here for others to look at. There is also...
Yeah, and just to address the Iliad add-on, I do want to mention that we're aware of that and are evaluating it. It might be able to be used for HathiTrust Resource Sharing, but might need to be iterated on and further developed. So that's something that is definitely on our list to look at.
Here is another one. Looking at slide 28, can you go over the last sentence on your last slide? If a library can't buy a print, can you go over in a little more detail about that sentence?
Oh, yes. Okay. So if your library doesn't hold a print copy, and if you choose not, as part of your acquisitions, not to buy more materials, so your library won't be able to have direct access to the HathiTrust copy. But part of the point of the way we're developing this service is that ideally a year from now, say, 200, 300 of our member libraries have signed up for this service. And so you would be able to find another HathiTrust member library who holds that copy, and they're able to send you the chapter or the article that your patron needs to use for their courses or their studies or whatever it is.
A couple more questions. Oh. Okay. Are you planning to publish a list of member library lender symbols so that we can more quickly send borrowing requests to libraries able to supply from HathiTrust?
That is something we've discussed, is like, how can you identify in your workflows which libraries are also signed up for HathiTrust Resource Sharing? And we've just started discussing that. I think that would make a lot of sense to do. And that would vary, I think, from system to system, like whether you're using Rapido or OCLC.
Okay, one more question. Would this also cover materials that are in off-site storage, i.e. not immediately accessible? Does that count as being on the shelf?
Yes, correct. Yes, we're trying to use a variety of different language to clarify, but like, you have a print copy in your collection that your library has paid for in the past. You hold it still in print. It's somewhere in your library holdings. I see a lot in chat with a lot of like discussion and questions to each other that are being answered.
I don't see any that haven't been answered yet, but we definitely have time for more questions if you want to put them in the Q&A. And again, this recording will be made available, the slides will be made available, and this has given us all kinds of ideas for initial documentation and support that we will want to share with you all. I'm going to drop again the interest form into the chat. So if you have any interest in either becoming a pilot library or even just staying closely connected to what HathiTrust is doing in our timeline, you can indicate as such on that form.
And if you want to reach out to me and like have a meeting with me or invite me to one of your consortial meetings, my email is on this slide and I will type it into the chat as well. So feel free to reach out.
Couple more questions. I think Melissa can answer this one. Will the chat and the Q&A with links be included with the recording?
Yes, I can do that.
And finally, how will you make the decision on pilot participation if you receive many expressions of interest?
So we have several working groups at HathiTrust that are focused on this project, and I expect that I will work with my colleagues to evaluate the submissions and likely develop a checklist to make sure like we have one library that uses this system. We have one library that is from this type of college. So just making sure that we have diverse representation, and some other elements might go into that decision-making process. Like, for example, if we haven't worked with a library before, it'd be really exciting to now have a new connection with them. So.
This is a great question. Will this service be included in the membership price?
We are not anticipating any raises in fees to support this service. And in fact, that has gone into our considerations about the specific service model that and how we are developing this service, because we wanted to limit any cost increases. And so the service model is specifically intended to avoid that. And so, yes, this service is currently included in the membership price that you are currently paying and will not be there will not be an additional fee for it.
There's another one here in chat if we've got a minute. Will a library system consortium be considered one library, or will the individual libraries within be on their own?
It would be at the service would be provided at the individual library level. And we know there's some nuances around that. For example, the Claremont colleges all share one library. So like it's one library for all the campuses. And then there's different nuances on that. I will say that the supporting different kinds of consortium might be something we might consider in the future. It just, right now, it doesn't work with our membership model. So there's things that prevent us from being able to do things at the consortial level.
Here's another one. Is participation in the shared print program a prerequisite?
No, it is not. It is, the shared print program is a separate program. The goal of that is to make sure that there is a print copy committed to be retained for every digital text in HathiTrust, and those print copies are distributed across the membership. It is separate from HathiTrust Resource Sharing, but could be a good way for shared print participants to be able to use digital versions of HathiTrust texts rather than their retained titles. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
I'm also going to go ahead and stop the recording in case anybody has any other questions that they want to ask that they don't want to ask on the recording.
Great.
So everybody watching the recording, bye for now.